Okay, no problem. So, what I thought I'd talk about a little bit today is just a few of those kind of things that you often discover when you're really interested in technical SEO and you just mooch around and you're trying to fix a site. Sometimes you come across things that are maybe slightly out of the ordinary, and often you'll forget to make a note of them, or you don't really get a chance to really share them with anybody. I'm sure we all have those kind of things. So I just thought I'd share just a few of those. I just uh, recent discoveries, if you like. Some of them you'll already know about. Some of them I already know about, but often it's just a case of really sort of just pulling it all together and getting that information out there. Really, hopefully, it'll be useful to maybe somebody. So I'm going to press on without further ado. So the first thing, really, that I started having a root around with was you'll most of you'll know Oliver. Oliver has actually a full face. I know on Twitter he's only got his half face there, but he has a full face. I've met him, and he's a really nice chap. Super clever. Always trying lots and lots of things and mooching around and testing with technical SEO. And there was quite a furor the other week in that he's kind of done a little bit of testing with turning up the crawl rate to high, and he kind of theorized that maybe there were some default buckets and so forth. He had a really interesting post, which is referenced towards the end, and you should really, when you get a chance to look at that. So I thought, oh, I'm going to have a look at this. So obviously, Oliver had referenced the fact that there seem to be some defaults for e-commerce, maybe defaults for blogs, etc. Yeah, so I thought, oh, I'm going to go and have a look. Oliver theorized, as I say, we all have theories, that there's a kind of a crawl rate default for a high quality SEO blog, and that there was also a default for maybe an e-commerce blog. And Oliver had turned up the crawl rate high in settings on Google Search Console, which is great. And he found that he actually had really a positive impact on clicks. So what we decided to do was have a little look at to see whether there were correlations between, if you like, different types of sites, whether there were buckets, default buckets, and so forth, that shared some commonalities. And we did find that actually a lot of the sites seem to have this 333.333 site default requests per second. So we only looked at about 30 sites overall. So it'd be interesting actually to hear what other people find when they have a look in their Google Search Console. And it kind of seemed to be that there may be something connected with perhaps the different types of CMSs. There seems to be some crossover with WordPress sites, and maybe the different platforms and what they were built with, and obviously seem to be different correlations with things like whether things were shared. Shopify, I don't know. I'm not sure that there's actually an e-commerce fixed setting as such. Seems that it may be related to things like whether you're on a CDN and whether you're actually on a different type of application platform and a CMS, etc. Database-driven sites that are quite well traffic seem to have this 10 seconds between requests, and especially when they were on like a dedicated server. And it seemed to maybe, there's a bit more, seemed to maybe fit with this whole like crawl patterns that goes right back to the days of dust crawling, where some of the academic papers and the research papers talk about building hints on what not to crawl and when, common patterns based for efficiency. So anyway, that was quite interesting. So what we did was we thought, oh, right, we're going to test this on a site that we'd had some issues with, not really getting the crawl for quite a long time, had some legacy stuff. So we thought, oh, well, actually, it was quite low traffic, and actually it's already getting like 10 seconds between requests, 0.1 requests per second, but we're going to turn it right up to high. So we turned it up to 2 requests per second, 0.5 seconds between requests. And we could see we got a message, custom crawl rate requested for the site. Within a day or two, we'll look to action it. Bear in mind the word requested. It's like anything, you know, it seems to me that, you know, you can request these things, but you're not necessarily gonna get them. So what happened? Well, a week later, no difference at all to crawling. Hadn't really received the sort of I mean, Oliver did say that he didn't see a massive difference in crawling, but obviously that was a smaller site. It's quite a large site. It's not getting a huge amount of crawl, and actually crawl went down. So nothing, nada, zilch, zero. So we thought, okay, so we cancelled that. That hadn't seemed to have worked at all. But actually, you know, you can report a problem with how Google bots crawl on the site. So we dug this out, and you can find this. It's fairly well hidden in Google Search Console. You have to kind of really dig around, but you can file a report with how report a problem with how Google bots crawl on your site, and the team will go off and investigate. What happened? Nothing. Nada, zilch, zero. So it does kind of seem that ultimately, you're not necessarily going to get these things just because you ask for them. So what we did see, though, was that a few days, 2 or 3 days after the request was made, the slider was turned up, there was this huge spike in time spent downloading a page, and kilobytes downloading a page seemed to be out of the ordinary, really. But it seems that what happens is, it almost seems as though Google came in to test and maybe sample up in everything and found that actually it couldn't be handled. So nothing was done, do nothing. So we thought, right, well, if we're going to increase the crawl, then we clearly need to try and make it so that we increase the speed. So we started to do some page speed investigations. We weren't in a hugely really bad place. Obviously, when you compare us with the likes of like ASOS on this particular post, it wasn't horrific. I mean, obviously, this is ASOS on the left-hand side. You know, their scores and their GT metrics comparison, they were appalling compared with this project. But, you know, we didn't have a CDN, so it's not on Cloudflare. But one thing you should know is that Cloudflare will not generally increase your Google page speed scores anyway. There's a recent blog post by Cloudflare that talks about how, in actual fact, they work differently and why they work differently. And Google's Gary Hirsch confirmed that actually Cloudflare and PageSpeed's insights, they're kind of not going to produce the same results because they take different things into consideration. There's a whole blog post on that. Oh, hopefully, ignore the noise. Oh, miss that. Let's turn these off. These notifications. Sorry. Okay, there you go. So, okay, so the first thing we thought is, right, we'll go and have a look, and we'll install the page speed module on Apache. Well, it's there, it's available, etc. But what we did find, and hopefully it's supposed to do things out of the box here, but what we did find is, in actual fact, there's huge conflicts on that. So we went off, I went into GitHub and had a bit of a chat with the GitHub team that are running on the page speed mod, and actually found that actually what was happening is it has a conflict with Ajax form fills. So actually what happened is we lost quite a lot of leads through the site because of when page mod loads, it actually tries to load a full page, cache it, etc., or increase the speed. Actually, it was just pulling in elements, because obviously Ajax and the likes of JSON are really not full page loads as such. So there's some issues there. So that wasn't really, we had to remove that. So, okay, so the next thing we thought is, right, well, what we're going to do is we'll zip everything, because obviously zipping everything is really fast, and it's gonna make a huge difference. So actually, yes, there are big savings. We zipped, and we found that actually there's a huge saving on the page, the overall load, etc., with the compressed size. But then what we did find is compression actually has a cost, because it increases time to first byte. There's a really interesting blog post here that looks at that, that's by Cloudflare. They talk about some web page tests they did, whereby in actual fact, compression obviously massively increases the time to first byte generally, but actually they found that overall it didn't actually, the page overall just loaded quicker than when compression wasn't involved. So actually compression was a good thing. And actually that blog post by Cloudflare talks about as well, is time to first byte really all that? Stop worrying about time to first byte. What they found as a measure of is actually when they did some tests on web page test, they actually found that the time to first byte was counted as the H in HTTP the message, the header response. So actually, it wasn't necessarily the user interaction. When you look at what Google had to say, they say you should reduce your server response time to 200 milliseconds. So I was a little bit unclear on this as to exactly what this meant. So I started to ask what people think was the best, what would be defined as server response, or the best time in which to actually connect, if you like, to a server. Before long, a few people got involved. Before long, John from Google, John Mueller, came along and started to interact a little bit. He, in his kind of very funny, sarcastic way, bless him, he turned around and said, I think it would probably be best to connect to it at a time when it's quiet, i.e. in the evening. So obviously, he's quite jokey. But in actual, all seriousness, he then started to interact a little bit and said, look at the page as a whole until it's ready to interact. Look for low-hanging fruit. Might be the initial HTML response, usually where application level speed plays in. So it's often the waiting time. Often after time to first byte, it's the wait, the HTML, critical render, things that are critically interactive, okay? Because obviously we can do other things, we can delay stuff, etc. Yeah. So critical interaction path, optimized for users before the tools, because often they'll come out with different scores. So what did we do? We started to route and think, well, actually, what's delaying the user from getting the content? Bear in mind, there's no CDN at all. It's not on Cloudflare, no caching really on this site. So what we did was we discovered that the CSS was massive. Yeah, they had loads and loads of code because people had not wanted to give up things, and they just kept building and building on top of it. And sometimes there were some CSS files with duplications of code that was actually called in another file, but obviously because CSS runs in the order in which it's called, the previous earlier code was not even being called at all, but still the whole file was being downloaded. It was absolutely massive, 8,000 plus lines of CSS. Every load of the page was having to call that. Yeah. So we chopped that right down massively. 7,500 lines of unnecessary code. What do you think happened? Nothing bad. Actually, 7.5 thousand of those lines of code were not in use. They were old pages, etc. They were just on parts of the site that hadn't been used in quite a long time. So review what's actually being used. Yeah. So we're starting to get there. Yeah. Originally we started off quite high in terms of page load score. I think it was about 5 or 6 seconds, something like that. But now we're down to 2.9. Okay. So what else do we do? Okay, so what we did is we discovered actually that there were like 7 CSS files. So we merged, we used the minify CSS and minify JavaScript. And what we found is that actually, so the important thing is with JS, you have to make sure it's all in the right order. The other option, obviously, is to progressively load it. So only call it when it's needed, asynchronously, etc. Deferring, you can also defer. I'm going to come to that a bit later on. But actually, the point is, make it so that there's as few as calls possible, and it's only called when needed. What else did we find? So we started to chop through the list on the page speed tests, etc. And we obviously came across you should minimize redirects. Well, the redirects are obviously not on your site. So how are you going to minimize redirects on Google Analytics? Because obviously Google, you could update the code from Analytics in your own code, but at some point or another, it kind of starts to become a little bit unmanageable. You end up with these redirect chains from third-party platforms. So you get this. This is the message that comes through. What can we do about that? So what we can do is, as I say, we may not be able to minimize the redirects as such, but we can kind of prepare and say, look, we're always going to need these usually. Let's load them in the browser so they're ready, so they're waiting, so you're aware that actually we'll get the DNS connection out of the way. We'll have to keep connecting, and it's actually sat there waiting for us for when we need it. That actually reduces some latency with these redirections on third-party sites. So what else? Okay, so this is quite a big dynamic site that we're kind of working with. We found that actually, because it's like custom built code from the past, from a long time ago, the application logic seems to be quite a big problem. we were finding that actually what was happening as well with unoptimized database calls were like taking quite a long time to actually fully load the page. So even though we were managing to sort other things out, we were still getting these like SQL queries that were being like run repeatedly, or PHP was like calling things repeatedly. So what we started to do then is started to look at ways in which we could re-optimize the database to sort of make fewer calls, look at different ways to sort of recode things so that actually it was more efficient, looked at things that could maybe pull loads of things back that actually you didn't really want, that may actually also be not that related. So looking at SQL in PHP My Admin, which is obviously on like an Apache server, cPanel, things like the wildcards surrounding like and projects in SQL that actually just literally kind of pull maybe way too much stuff. So actually it's a case of like trying to test these things. And for me, you know, increasingly SEO is kind of headed in this direction of trying to be almost like a developer, and you kind of have to have many hats on. But obviously application logic is a big problem. It can slow things down a lot. One easy win for those who are running WordPress sites is to actually look in the WordPress database and make sure that all those plugins that you've deactivated or that you've deleted have not left behind things, or that you haven't got a redirecting server with an old database actually still like loading things like BB plugin or whatever, yeah, or event calendar plugins, database tables, etc. Just review it all, just strip it all back. You'll find actually it makes a huge difference. So add things like keep a live connection as well to stop having to keep reopening the connection. We're starting to get there a little bit now. Obviously, we still got issues, still trying to work through things, but starting to get a bit smaller. So we did, as I say, things like we looked at messy crawl with things like builder caches that were from included files. So, for instance, the WordPress builder theme builders, for instance, when we look through server log files, we actually found that what happens is Googlebot comes in, crawls, fetches the URL, and then also the files that kind of go together are also crawled sort of pretty much instantaneously around the same sort of time. Well, not around, but pretty much instantaneously, one after the other. So in actual fact, keeping those to a real minimum, or just making sure things like the caching was also being pulled, etc. So these builders have like caches and cache crawl being added. So maybe just look through parameters and potentially add those in Google Search Console. So we started to also look at things like cache control as well. So obviously we added long lifetimes for things like image files and CSS and JavaScript. But because we were doing lots of other changes as we were going along, we didn't want the issue of having to keep re-editing things like the htaccess file. And obviously it's not necessarily great for people to be editing that, because you can really break a site very badly. So obviously we started to implement the content fingerprinting approach with CSS and JavaScript, where actually you could just load it and add a different cache number and it refreshes it completely. And obviously it flushes it out as well for those users to the site, refreshes the cache in the browser. So what else we do? So we reduced 7 JavaScript files again into 1. Yeah, it's not necessarily ideal. Depends on whether we've obviously wanted to sort of make sure that a particular part of the site needed all these files. Yeah, so in other parts of the site, we're not going to call all these. So it'd be just based on as and when things are needed, really. But in this instance, we wanted to just reduce the calls. We still got work to do as we're going along. Again, same thing. It's got to all be in the exact order that the files were in originally, because obviously it will impact functionality. So now we're getting there a little bit. Okay. So we still got room to go, quite a lot of room to go. But bear in mind, this is not on a CDN. There's no caching involved really at this stage, other than a little bit with images, JavaScript and CSS. Yeah. So we're down to like 1.75. Okay. So then what did we do? So next we sort of added the defer loading of the JavaScript so that actually the whole page is loaded and then the JavaScript is called, because we wanted to sort of clear that critical interactive path, if you like, right at the end, yeah. So it's going a bit better, okay. Deferring JavaScript till after the full load, 1.77 seconds, yeah. So on why slow now, as I say, we've still got things to do, yeah. We've got our page speed to go up to date on this without any kind of CDN such. Why slow is at 82. There's always a difference between the page speed times to load, because obviously they're calling them different places, etc. So Pingdom has a setting to sort of check your site from Melbourne or Stockholm or Sweden. Not actually sure it has out of the box the free one to check it from London. Others have the ability to check it from London. GT Metrics, if you're logged in and a user, has quite a lot of out of the box stuff, so you can actually look at things, look from different browsers, etc. And web page test is brilliant. Obviously, has different browsers that you can use, etc. Different locations, and obviously Lighthouse goes without saying. So finally, we started to do a few more things. As I say, we've still got like loads of things to do on this. Using little things like base64 encoding, so binary to text ASCII encoding. We kind of turned the logo into obviously numbers and characters using ASCII encoding. So actually we didn't have to call the logo as an image, literally just base64 right into the page. So actually that's optimized. But it's only suitable for small images because base64 is quite a big file size. As such, you can use the base64 encoder here, but it's really good for very small images. So then we're down to 1.69 seconds with no CDN, still improvements to make. A lot of improvements. We've still got loads of stuff we can do. Will we add a CDN like Cloudflare? Yes, of course we will. Yeah, but obviously we don't want to rely on that just to think it's going to solve all our problems. Then we go to the page speed tool and find actually that we're still getting really low scores. So we will add it. Obviously, we're hoping to get things really, really much faster. Yeah. So obviously we maybe will test again turning things up to high now. We've managed to make the site so actually loads a lot quicker. Still got loads to do. So those are a few things that we've discovered. Obviously, there's loads of other stuff that we've discovered along the way as well. But this is another thing that we thought was quite interesting. Maybe hopefully it's just a little tidbit of information. So there was quite a bit of discussion. There's always quite a bit of discussion on forums and whatnot around, does grammar impact SEO and search rankings? So I was reading quite a bit of stuff recently on information retrieval and read quite a bit of stuff on what they call the SoundX algorithm, which actually, if you like, it's an algorithm that, I'm just going to see if I can find something that shows you. Okay, so it's an algorithm that actually converts letters to numbers, and then generates some tables and then converts it back based on what sounds like each other. And it replaces vowels and consonants, and if there's one wrong letter, it will then attempt to sort of adjust to understand what this means. It's quite complex actually, but really interesting. You can have a look up SoundX on Wikipedia, and it kind of is there to handle spelling mistakes or something like it. Yeah. So there's another one. I think it's a bit more recent called the Metaphone algorithm, which also looks at spelling mistakes, etc. So obviously, the use for this, where is it? Well, it helps to realise actually that grammar and SEO. Grammar doesn't have an impact on SEO because search engines work it out. And John has said, oh yeah, we have things to work it out. So I think it's kind of SoundX or similar. And actually it helps us also though with things like fuzzy searches. This is interesting. All the references are at the end. This is where obviously site search is becoming increasingly important now. So things like Elasticsearch, etc. You can actually use things like SoundX functions to understand, and the SoundX algorithm to understand potential semantic possibilities for things like site search when people enter things incorrectly. Yeah, fuzzy searches. So fuzzy is like, well, we're not quite sure what this is. So actually read about this. Is going forward, site search and potential databases and search engines using databases to pull data is potentially going to be much bigger. And there's this as well, it's quite interesting. It's by Wolfram Alpha. You can have a look, you can enter some into this first box what sounds like this, and it's a spelling error, etc. And it spits out all sorts of different things. But also, I think it might kind of help a little bit with things around when, for instance, we've got two topics within a website that kind of sound similar, and there's not a huge amount of difference between the pages, but they actually mean different things. You can maybe look for areas where actually you could discover that there is crossover, that search engines might be misunderstanding, so you can add some more uniqueness, more semantics, etc. So have a look at that. Again, the references are at the end. So Wolfram Alpha, that's interesting. If you want to do things like test a little bit with the Soundex function, because it's built into MySQL, you can do some tinkering with it. I can't remember what it's called, but a really great SEO who I consider a friend, Mike Kozlinski, who's on Fearless Schultz on Twitter. He came across something just when we were discussing this that looks at using Soundex with SQL, MySQL. So I did send him a message earlier saying, what was it called? No, you've not got back to me. So actually, hopefully Mike will share that. But actually Soundex, I think it's really worth having a look at and tinkering with for SEOs to actually understand what perhaps actually might be being seen as very similar to something else.